Last times, we've been going through recently from Exodus 7 to 10. We've gotten the first 9 of the plagues of Egypt, the acts of God to get people's attention. Starting with the first thing that God does is He hits the Nile, turns the Nile to blood, then brings the frogs and the gnats and the flies. And He goes through and He is systematically transforming the nature of what people think is real and what's not. He's redefining what dominance is and dominion is. He is establishing who is God and who is not. He is also differentiating and distinguishing between who He calls His own and who He calls enemy. I was going through this morning and looking at the way these plagues laid out, and a lot of people have done a lot of studies, and they'll point out how each one of these specifically targets a certain set of the Egyptian gods, and we could go there, but I that's not where we're headed. I'd really rather focus on our God than theirs. I mean, the whole point of these was that theirs didn't matter, but I did notice that there was a pattern, and somebody else has probably brought this out before, but for me this morning, just going over it, I noticed that the first 2, God brought judgment to and from the water. And then the second 2, He brought judgment and a trial to the people through the air, through little flying insects. It was one was like massive annoyance, and the other one had the potential to be a biting insect, but these are 2 that came from the air. Then the plague of livestock and the festering boils were both an attack on flesh. He hit the animals that were out in the field, and then the boils hit the animals and hit the people, but this was against flesh. This was an illness. Both of these were illness, both of the livestock and of the people. Then He had 2 judgments that came through. I don't even know if I want to call them judgments, but 2 attacks, 2 hand smiting, striking things, but from the sky to the land itself. The hail and stuff, it hit anything that was dumb enough to still be outside, because He gave a warning. He said, if you're going to listen, I'll bring in all of the people, bring in all the livestock that survived this other thing. But really what this was hitting was the plants. And the locusts, again, it came and hit the plants. So we had from the water, from the air, the flesh, against the land, and then the darkness, and the one we're going to be getting into, the Firstborn Sun. It was almost like these are 2 that actually struck their hope. Their ability to see, their ability to perceive, their again, they had their God, the sun god, but God turned off light for them, like shut down light. And then what He's going through next is, He hits the Firstborn Sun. This is the inheritor. And it's not just of the people, but also of the animals. It's everything, everywhere. He goes through and He hits them right in their souls. And God was laying this out, and He's setting this up to increase His fame in the land, to increase His greatness in the eyes of both His own people and of their enemies. But He's doing it all the way around. He's hitting from every angle: water, air, flesh, land. It's all just He's encompassing a reality as far as they can see, what they know, their experiences. He's touched everything, and all of this is leading up to the very last of the plagues. And again, this is going to be where we're going to get into today. Is this Exodus 11, which we talk about the Passover. We're getting into the Passover, but the judgment against the firstborn son. And I would say that most of these things were a punishment. They were a striking. They were almost like a more punishment than judgment. But this last one really feels to me like this is a judgment. This is one that it's not just that somebody was out in the field and they got hit by hail, or that somebody they got boils or whatever. It's not a blanket thing. This is a specifically targeted deal Also, when we go back to Exodus 4:22, when God sent Moses to Egypt, he said, "Tell Pharaoh that Israel is my firstborn son. And since you won't release my firstborn son, I'm going to kill your firstborn son." This is the only one of these that's coming up that Moses had a heads up about. But all of these have been building to this one. Before we actually get into Exodus 11, I'm going to go back to Exodus 10, right there at the end. It'll be verses 28 and 29. He's just, the plague of darkness has ended. Pharaoh's come in and they've argued back and forth again. And Pharaoh's furious with Moses because Moses has said, "No, I'm going to take everybody and we're going to take our herds and everything." And that's how it's got to be. So verse 28, "Get out of here," Pharaoh shouted to Moses. "I'm warning you, never come back to see me again. The day you see my face, you will die." "Very well," Moses replied. "I will never see your face again." And then we get into chapter 11, but what I need to point out is that if we try to read this particular part of the scripture the way we would normally read a book and expect it to fall in chronological order, it can get a little confusing. What we actually have happening here is that Moses is about to do a couple of flashbacks. Because, verse 1 in chapter 11 says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, I will strike Pharaoh and the land of Egypt with one more blow. After that, Pharaoh will let you leave this country. In fact, he will be so eager to get rid of you that he will force you all to leave." When it says, "Then the Lord said that," you feel like, okay, Moses has just left Pharaoh's presence, said, "I'll never see you again," and then God did this. But what's actually going on is we're kind of getting some information. As we go along, we'll see that a lot of what we're about to read actually happened before Moses said, "I'll never see your face again." Let me just go ahead and read on. It's verse 2. "Tell all the Israelite men and women to ask their Egyptian neighbors for articles of silver and gold." Verse 3 says, "Now the Lord had caused the Egyptians to look favorably on the people of Israel, and Moses was considered a very great man in the land of Egypt, respected by Pharaoh's officials and the Egyptian people alike." Moses had announced to Pharaoh, "This is what the Lord says. At midnight tonight I will pass through the heart of Egypt. All the firstborn sons will die in every family in Egypt, from the oldest son of Pharaoh who sits on his throne to the oldest son of his lowliest servant girl who grinds the flour. Even the firstborn of all the livestock will die. Then a loud wail will rise throughout the land of Egypt, a wail like no one has heard before or will ever hear again. But among the Israelites it will be so peaceful that not even a dog will bark. Then you will know that the Lord makes a distinction between the Egyptian and the Israelites. All the officials of Egypt will run to me and fall to the ground before me. 'Please leave,' they will beg. 'Hurry and take your followers with you. Only then will I go.' Then, burning with anger, Moses left Pharaoh." So all this, like if Moses had said, "Very well, I'll never see you again," and then leaves, and then you turn around and he's talking to Pharaoh again and leaving. So you're kind of like, and also there's this whole at midnight tonight this is going to happen. It sounds, if you just read it through the way we would normally do, that this happened, and then he turned right back around and went back into Pharaoh, and they saw each other, and nothing happened. But it's that whole, what was it? In verse 4, Moses had announced to Pharaoh. So we got to remember that it's a different culture, the different style of writing, very different literary methods that were going on. And I don't know exactly why he phrased it the way he did, but it's like it keeps circling around and around and around to kind of give you this this flow to kind of build up what's going on. Let's see here. Okay, so verse 9. "Now the Lord had told Moses earlier," see, we keep getting this step back and step back, Neil. "Pharaoh will not listen to you, but then I will do even more mighty miracles in the land of Egypt. Moses and Aaron performed these miracles in Pharaoh's presence, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he wouldn't let the Israelites leave the country." It's almost like the entire chapter 11 is like we had the plague of darkness, And 11's almost like those little cars that you used to play with. You'd pull them back and then let them go. But when you're a kid, you really want them to go far, so you keep pulling them back and pulling them back. For me, 11 is, it's like he's pulling it back. It's like, no, let's keep going. Let's wind this up to get the full effect. So again, we go to chapter 12, and we're not moving forward. We're actually stepping further back again. Said, chapter 12, verse 1, while the Israelites were still in the land of Egypt, the Lord gave the following instructions to Moses and Aaron. From now on, this month will be the first month of the year for you. He's changing their whole calendar. Keep talking about how God is establishing things and recreating things. He's also, another thing that's happened in all of these is you keep seeing the phrase, like has never been seen before, like has never been happened in all of the history. God is redefining everything for the Israelites. He's redefining their identity as a nation. He's redefining their identity as His people. He's redefining for them who He is. He came up as El Shaddai before, but never in the history of the Jews, even the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, never did you see Him do anything like this. And He's saying, like, we're going to start from scratch here. And I don't even want to build on the old. I want to give you something brand new. I even want to change your calendar. Your calendar now is going to start. You're going to call day one. The first month is going to be the one where I showed up and brought you out. So from now on, this month will be the first month of the year for you. Announce to the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each family must choose a lamb or a young goat for a sacrifice, one animal for each household. If a family is too small to eat a whole animal, let them share with another family in the neighborhood. Divide the animal according to the size of each family and how much they can eat. The animal you select must be 1 year old, a 1 year old male, either a sheep or a goat, with no defects. What we're going to see here with this Passover lamb, Passover sacrifice, is you start seeing some precedents set up for Jesus. We have what is going to ultimately be a sacrifice that's going to be a covering for the Passover of judgment. And so we've got is a young male without defect. Then we go to verse 6. Take special care of this chosen animal until the evening of the 14th day of the first month. Then the whole assembly of the community of Israel must slaughter the lamb or young goat at twilight. They are to take some of the blood and smear it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the animal. The same night they must roast the meat over fire and eat it along with the bitter salad greens and bread made without yeast. Do not eat any of the meat raw or boiled in water. The whole animal, including the head, legs, and internal organs, must be roasted over a fire. Do not leave any of it until the next morning. Burn whatever is not eaten before the morning. So you've got this animal that they are taking care of. They're taking it in for a certain amount of time. So it's like Jesus came in and was among us. He didn't just show up as a grown man and become the sacrifice. He actually lived with us, lived among us, and was raised with us. And again, the community had to kill the sacrifice at the same time. It wasn't something you done like this or that or this. There was an appointed time. There was a set time, set place, a set way that it had to be done. An interesting little picture. It may not be truly significant, but if you get a doorway, set this down, this is something my dad liked to point out, but if you get a doorway that's basically shaped like so, they had to take the blood and they had to put it here, here, and here, which my dad liked frequently to point out makes a picture of a cross. And you have the pierced hands, the crown of thorns, and then the blood at the feet. It's probably just a coincidence, I don't know, but it is a nice picture that just shows again that this is something that foreshadows Christ. Ultimately what ends up going on is this is the doorway that goes in and out of the household. This is the portal outside to the inside to the home. And this doorway would then be covered. The entrance and exiting of what was going on would be covered by a sign of obedience that was paid for with a very specific death, a sacrifice for that covering. Another thing that they were not allowed to do is like they had to roast everything. There was nothing to be like, cast up, so like whatever. No part of this animal would be left to go bad. If anything didn't get consumed, they had to burn it up. Again, you've got Jesus who, even the prophet said, like, you did not let your Holy One decay or to rot. Jesus was raised on the third day. We look at the story of Lazarus, like he was dead for 4 days, like he stinketh by now. His body has begun to decompose. All of this is showing that there can't be any decomposition. It cannot left to go waste. It cannot spoil. And this is again another picture of what would happen with the Messiah later on. Burn whatever is not eaten before morning. Verse 11. These are your instructions for eating this meal. Be fully dressed. Wear your sandals and carry your walking stick in your hand. Eat the meal with urgency, for this is the Lord's Passover. On that night I will pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn son and firstborn male animal in the land of Egypt. I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt, for I am the Lord. But the blood on your doorposts will serve as a sign, marking the houses where you are staying. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. This is the plague of death. This plague of death will not touch you when I strike the land of Egypt. This is a day to remember. Each year, from generation to generation, you must celebrate it as a special festival to the Lord. This is a law for all time. For 7 days, the bread you eat must be made without yeast. On the first day of the festival, remove every trace of yeast from your homes. Anyone who eats bread made with yeast during the 7 days of the festival will be cut off from the community of Israel. Now that sounds kind of like severe. In fact, a lot of the things that God is going to be telling them are going to come across as severe. But something that we've got to keep in mind is that God is not just, it's not like he's just starting to try to form a family. He's not just adopting a kid. He is establishing a nation, but he's establishing culture and precedent for the coming of the Messiah, who had to meet certain standards in order to redeem mankind. So everything that he's doing is very, very important and has to last for generation to generation to generation. And if he's not severe about it, they'll be lax, and the pattern has to be rigid. It has to be maintained. So there's zero tolerance for anything that would corrupt this pattern. Because if that pattern is allowed to get muddy or distorted, then when it comes time to actually fulfill the promises, those promises aren't clear anymore. So what God is doing is he's making sure they understand he's serious about this, but he's also establishing another thing, is he's holy, he's righteous, he's just, he's perfect and demanding. And if you're going to be one of his people, then you've really got to toe the line. Most of what you're going to see that he sets up and as he sets out the law are things that cannot consistently be fulfilled. We just cannot fulfill the law. We're born breaking the law, but he's establishing the gap between us and him. Again, also, when you look at yeast is something that is symbolic of sin. Later on, Jesus refers to it frequently. So this is a get sin out of your households. Get it gone. Don't let any of it be here. Part of it's also symbolic that they had to be ready to go as soon as God said go. So there was no time to have dough rising. Like the bread that's made with yeast has to have a certain amount of time to sit and to rise, and there's a word for that, but you've got to be ready to go real quick. So you have like just hard breads that can be baked quickly, they can be baked easily, that won't go bad if they're sitting there fermenting, for lack of a better word. Anyway, so no yeast at all, and anybody who ignores this, you're basically telling God you just don't care, and you're out, you're cut off. On the first day of the festival, and again on the seventh day, all the people must observe an official day for the Holy Assembly. No work of any kind may be done on these days except in the preparation of food. It's like a 7-day Sabbath, with the exception that they can go ahead and cook, because, hungry people. 17. Celebrate this festival of unleavened bread, for it will remind you that I brought your forces out of the land of Egypt on this very day. This festival will be a permanent law for you. Celebrate this day from generation to generation. I think it's interesting how often we talk about the don'ts of God. Don't do this, don't do that. Give this up, give that up. But very rarely do we stop and talk about how many times God said, you've got to celebrate. I'm making a law for you to have a party and celebrate good things. In fact, as we get later on in the law, I think there's at least 3 major festivals that God said, this is a natural thing you need to celebrate. Yes, there's time to fast, but there are times to feast as well. And I think it's super important to understand that the character of God is a God who says you should have a good time. You should feast. You should celebrate. We can get so stuck on the don't do this, don't do that we forget all about the God who said, let's have a party. I think it's also telling that the first public miracle that Jesus performed, the one that really publicly displayed his glory, was he made things better for a party. I mean, it was a wedding, and he was there, and he did it because his mom asked him to.
There was one verse somewhere that talked about if you can't get to the synagogue, to the temple, whatever, do it where you're at and party, revel.
Yes. Just neat to remember that God is a God of celebrations. Permanent law for you to celebrate this day from generation to generation. 18. The bread you eat must be made without yeast from the evening of the 14th day of the first month until the evening of the 21st day of that month. During those 7 days there must be no trace of yeast in your homes. Anyone who eats anything made with yeast during this week will be cut off from the community of Israel. These regulations apply both to the foreigners living among you and the native-born Israelites. During those days, you must not eat anything made with yeast. Wherever you live, eat only bread made without yeast. I think he's trying to make a point. Verse 21. Then Moses called all the elders of Israel together and said to them, go pick out a lamb or young goat for each of your families and slaughter the Passover animal. Drain the blood into a basin. Then take a bundle of hyssop branches and dip it into the blood. Brush the hyssop across the top and sides of the door frames of your houses. And no one may go out through the door until morning. There's a big lesson on covering here. There's authority that God has put in our lives. He's set things up a certain way. His law gives us the opportunity to give to that our obedience puts us in a place of safety. But if we step out of that obedience, it's like He set shelter here, and here we're safe. But if we disobey and we step out from that, a lot of times we will do that in our lives, and then bad things happen, and we wonder why God punished us, or we think that God's punishing us, and it's really that He set up protection in one place, and we stepped out somewhere else. So what He's saying is, I've provided a safe place for you. Don't leave it. For the Lord will pass through the land to strike down the Egyptians. But when He sees the blood on the top and the sides of the doorframe, the Lord will pass over your home. He will not permit His death angel to enter your house and strike you down. Remember, these instructions are a permanent law that you and your descendants must observe forever. When you enter the land the Lord has promised to give you, you will continue to observe this ceremony. Then your children will ask, what does this ceremony mean? And you will reply, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, for He passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt. And though He struck the Egyptians, He spared our families. When Moses had finished speaking, all the people bowed down to the ground and worshipped. Going to be running into a lot of repetition, where the same instruction is given over and over and over again. And again, going back into the Hebrew writing style, a lot of times for emphasis, they would repeat things not once, not twice, but frequently 3 times. And when you see something that's repeated 3 times in the Hebrew culture, it's like that means to the utmost, to the most extreme. You look in the book of Revelation, and the creatures are standing around saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty." The 3 repetitions is like He's the holiest, the utmost. It's super, super important. And so when you start seeing the same instruction repeated over and over again, that emphasis isn't just to be boring, or isn't just because these people are thick-headed. It's, you need to understand this is supremely important. This means something, and God isn't playing around. Okay, so verse 28. So the people of Israel did just as the Lord commanded through Moses and Aaron. And that night, at midnight, again, I want to back this up. What we just read was all stuff that had happened possibly even before the plague of darkness. Because there's a certain amount of time that lamb or goat had to be chosen, had to be brought into the household. They've got like from the first day to the 7th to the 14th to the 21st day. Not exactly sure where that plays out, but I know that they're supposed to be getting into readiness at this point, because at some point Moses is going to say it's going to be tonight. That's why they had to have this is what Moses is saying. It's like, go get the animals, sacrifice them now, because it's going to be tonight. So he's gone and talked to Pharaoh, turned, however that actually played out chronologically. But this has been finished off. Pharaoh has said no for the last time. Moses said it's going to be tonight. Comes back to the Israelites like, okay, all this preparation, it's time. And verse 29, and that night, at midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn sons in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who sat on his throne, to the firstborn son of the prisoner in the dungeons. Even the firstborn of their livestock were killed, whichever were left. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the people of Egypt woke up during that night, and a loud wailing was heard throughout the land of Egypt. There was not a single house where someone had not died. It's one thing to be attacked. It's like in a war. That's bad enough. It's another thing to have the Nile turn to blood. That's out there. It's another thing to have festering boils, or see hail falling from the sky, or locusts, or everything like that. Then you've got darkness that goes into your house, and then suddenly you're awakened and your firstborn son is dead. This is an enemy who didn't care about your walls, didn't care about your locks, didn't care about your armies, your strength of numbers, didn't care about your weapons. He came in and he executed judgment. I was thinking about Hurricane Michael and the way this area looked after that one storm, and how devastating everything was, and how long it took to kind of recover from that. And we've still got signs of it now. And that was one event that happened part of one day. And then we've got this, and then this, and then this, and this just keeps hitting and hitting and hitting and hitting. It's amazing that the Egyptians can even get out of bed. And then finally, God's supernatural hand of willpower on Pharaoh is removed, and he has this last attack. I will point out, it seems harsh, because we're so far separated from it. But this has been about 6-7 months or so. Up until that point, Israel has been in slavery, brutal slavery, for hundreds of years. And it kind of climaxed when Moses was a baby and Pharaoh just started murdering all of Israel's baby boys. When we think about Jesus, or not Jesus, but God coming through, and the death angel coming through and killing off these firstborn, we've got to understand that God isn't just, it's not a random thing. Pharaoh and Egypt as a nation murdered or tried to murder an entire generation of the Israelites. It wasn't even the first attempt, but this was the first thing that God did. It's like, okay, you used the Nile to kill the sons of my of my people. So I'm going to turn that to blood. But that was a precursor. All of these things were just God like showing his hand. That's why I say that this is actually the judgment that Egypt received. Because Egypt had been murdering God's children for generation after generation after generation. And it's not like he didn't warn them. I mean, this word was coming from way back. But at some point, you get beyond the point where you can repent. You have turned your back so thoroughly from God and from God's will and his ways that you have basically submitted yourself to destruction. And Egypt and Pharaoh in particular had already crossed that line. Again, verse 30, Pharaoh and all of his officials and all the people of Egypt woke up during the night, and a loud wailing was heard throughout the land of Egypt. There was not a single house where someone had not died. Verse 31, Pharaoh sent for Moses and Aaron during the night. Get out, he ordered. Leave my people and take the rest of the Israelites with you. Go and worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds, as you said, and be gone. Go, but bless me as you leave. All the Egyptians urged the people of Israel to get out of the land as quickly as possible, for they thought, we will all die. If you're paying attention, if you know that this is something to study, then you're going to pay attention to God's specific words. The Egyptians never really caught on to this. The Israelites really didn't catch on to this. This has never happened before. We know to pay attention that he said he was going to do this. The Egyptians just knew that they've been beat on for months, and every household has had someone die. And now these aren't all like just children. Some of these are grown men, because maybe the head of the household was the firstborn. So they've all lost somebody, maybe more than one somebody. And as far as they know, that could happen again tomorrow night. This may be, the God of the Israelites may be ready to wipe us out each day until the Israelites get out of here. So they're telling the Israelites, get out, get your stuff, let me help you pack. Get out of here or we won't survive, we'll all die. Verse 34, the Israelites took their bread dough before the yeast was added. Smart. They wrapped their kneading boards in their cloaks and carried them on their shoulders. And the people of Israel did as Moses had instructed. They asked the Egyptians for clothing and articles of silver and gold. The Lord caused the Egyptians to look favorably on the Israelites, and they gave the Israelites whatever they asked for. So they stripped the Egyptians of their wealth. That's just amazing. I mean, these are the slaves. They're being begged to leave, and Israel is looting Egypt, and Egypt is letting it happen voluntarily. I mean, it's not like they went in and just robbed us. They had like that, and they're just piling it on. Just take anything you want. Take all of it. There's nothing left of Egypt when Israel leaves. 37, that night the people of Israel left Ramesses and started for Succoth. There were about 600,000 men, plus all the women and children. A rabble of non-Israelites went with them, along with great flocks and herds of livestock. For bread they baked flat cakes from the dough without yeast they had brought from Egypt. It was made without yeast because the people were driven out of Egypt in such a hurry that they had no time to prepare the bread or other food. The people of Israel had lived in Egypt for 430 years. In fact, it was on the last day of the 430th year that the Lord's forces left the land. On this night, the Lord kept his promise to bring his people out of the land of Egypt. So this night belongs to him, and it must be commemorated every year by all the Israelites from generation to generation. There is a study, I don't have the details, and it's really kind of complicated, but you can go through and look at God made a promise to Abraham that he would sojourn in a land that he was a stranger in. Also, there was a word, I believe, to Joseph and possibly even to Jacob about how long the Israelites were going to be in Egypt and how they were going to be enslaved and how they were going to, there was all kinds of back and forth, but like there were different years listed in each one of them. But if you go back and actually do the study to see, okay, sojourn is not the same thing as like necessarily dwelling. You're kind of wandering in. And then there's another one that talks about how long they'll actually live and be enslaved in. And when you actually go through and pick it out, all of them actually work out to, in fact, you can go into and see the dates where the stuff is done and see how it lines up exactly to that day. In fact, Joseph even talked about when this day comes, take my bones with you. And very rarely do you see God lay something out to the day. But again, this is another one of those things where God's establishing who he is and what kind of promise keeper he is. And he's got his own timing, his own clock, but he isn't late. Okay, so verse 43. Chapter 12 is a long one. And again, we're going over the instructions for the Passover. And the Passover is it's huge. I mean, we see it show up in the New Testament with Jesus frequently. In fact, the Passover is the supper that Jesus, the Last Supper that Jesus had was a Passover supper, which is no accident. That a lot of the things that are going on is symbolic. I mean, can you imagine being Jesus, knowing what your purpose is, knowing what the purpose of the Passover was, and the supper, and eating that meal, and eating that last meal, and knowing that the lamb that had been sacrificed for this purpose, he was about to be that lamb. When he said, "This is my body broken for you," the lamb that they were eating is right there. I mean, he's living fulfillment of Scripture. He's living and seeing. He's eating the celebration of what's about to happen, and it's not going to be a fun thing for him. But this is one of the reasons why the instructions of the Passover keep coming up over and over again, because it has to survive until that Last Supper. And past that, because again, Israel is supernaturally blinded to the reality of Jesus as Messiah, but the truth is still there. It's still resonating, and it's being preserved. It's being protected. God is really holding fast to it, so that when the day comes when he's going to make sure that he reveals himself to them, and they, as a nation, accept Christ, it's all going to be preserved. So again, verse 43, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "These are the instructions for the festival of Passover. No outsiders are allowed to eat the Passover meal. But any slave who has been purchased may eat of it if he has been circumcised, if he's been brought into the covenant." No longer an outsider in that case. He's actually been brought into the home. Temporary residents and hired servants may not eat it. This is just for us. This is for my people, the people who have made a commitment to me. Each Passover lamb must be eaten in one house. Do not carry it outside. Do not carry any of its meat outside, and do not break any of its bones. That's another one. Jesus' bones were not broken. The whole community of Israel must celebrate this Passover festival. If there are foreigners living among you who want to celebrate the Lord's Passover, let all their males be circumcised. Again, if you want to be part of this, you've got to be part of this all the way. This is not something, you can't just come in. It's not like what we do with Christmas, where anybody who happens to want to can put up a tree and get presents. It's not like that. This is specific. This is God saying, this is between me and my people. If you want to be part of this, you've got to join. And it's no signing a card. You've got to join. But no uncircumcised male may ever eat the Passover meal. This instruction applies to everyone, whether a native-born Israelite or a foreigner living among you. So all the people of Israel followed the Lord's commands to Moses and Aaron. On that very day, the Lord brought the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt like an army. They were the slaves. None of them raised a hand. None of them had anything really to do except, obey a couple of commandments and stay in Goshen and stay out of trouble. And God brought them out like a conquering army. There's a lot to be said right there, all by itself. God did all this. All they had to do was, when the flies came, he said, keep them out of Goshen. So they just stay where they're supposed to be. When the Passover judgment came, it's like, obey me, follow these procedures, stay where I told you to stay. God does the work, his people are fine. The things that he's really demanding is obey me, trust me, and be committed to me. If you want to be a part of what I'm doing, then you got to make sure you're one of my people and not one of theirs. Over and over again, you see God saying, I'm making a distinction between my people and the Egyptians. Over and over again, you see him saying, I'm differentiating between the Israelites and between others. What he's saying is, I'm holy. Like later on, he says, you be holy as I am holy. You be separate, set apart unto me, because there's no one else like me. And if you can't be that, you're not worthy to be one of mine. That's why the sign of the covenant is a physical sign that requires commitment. And again, this relationship that God's called us to, He is not looking for people who are being casual about this relationship. Now, we no longer have the burden of being cut off from the community. We no longer have the burden of death for failing in the laws that are coming. Thank you, Jesus. Paul said that, who can possibly save me from the wretch that I am? Thank God it's Christ. He's the one who did it. So that burden is no longer there. But the heart of God is still, be holy as I'm holy. I can do wonders, but I've called you to be my people. There should be, people ought to be able to tell when they look at you and look at your life that you're not the same as everybody else. They ought to be able to look and see the way you live your life, the way you speak to people, the way you dress, the way you interact, that there's a difference between you and the people in the world around you. If there's not, then are you really His? One of the things that we talk about later on, like Jesus talks about the law, it's like, I haven't come to do away with the law, but to fulfill it. And a lot of people will say that because Jesus has provided this blanket forgiveness, which is true, that we're basically free to do anything we want. And technically, we're free from the burden of the death penalty. We're free from the burden of judgment and damnation. But if we're really free for all those things, aren't we? Doesn't that really mean that we're free from the burden that holds us down and causes us to stumble in the attempt to fulfill that law? We haven't gotten there yet, and we'll go into this a little bit more. But as God set out this law, what He's really doing is defining His purity, His rightness, His righteousness. He's starting that here. He's laying a foundation. It's like, there are my people and there are not my people. And He's already given them this law, like, get yeast out. Get that out. Don't let it even be a part of anybody who doesn't follow this. Cut them off. They're not worthy. And then you get further along, it's like, there's no other God. Don't create any other images. Don't use my name in a flippant or a vain way. And He just goes down this line. And He's establishing His character. He's establishing standards. But He's also, as He's doing that, He's also laying out the consequences for those standards. It's like, if you fail here, you're doomed. If you fail here, you're doomed. You fail here, you're doomed. You'll be cut off. You'll be cast out. You'll be stoned. So then He lists out all these requirements for the sacrifices that are coming. It's like, when you mess up in this way, here's how you fix it. When you mess up in this way, here's how you fix it. You're going to mess up. You're not good enough. Something has to die. It's either going to be this animal that has to follow all these things because it's got to be just right because I'm holy. And so day by day by day by day, they're going to have an entire culture, a law, their holy writings are all going to be about how great God is, how far they have fallen from it, and this burden of death. As they set up the tabernacle and the tent of meetings, the rituals set up for sacrifices, the Levites, when they're doing it, they're sacrificing from sun up to sundown every single day. So their whole culture is going to be surrounded by, we're sinful, we're not good enough for God, and something is dying all the time because we fail. We keep trying, but we keep failing. We keep trying, and something is dying and dying and dying. And Jesus came and said, I'll die. I'll die once. Now you can try, and you don't have to stop and keep having, something has to keep dying. I can take the weight of all that death off of you onto me, and now you can walk free. If you stumble, just get right back up. You don't have the corpses of all these sacrifices on your back, figuratively, mentally. You're free to continue to strive toward this standard that God's given. We still can't reach it. There are moments that the Holy Spirit can supernaturally enable us to be more than we are. And perhaps even a lifestyle of that, if we can learn how to trust Him completely. But ultimately, the law is there to tell us who God is and who He isn't, to tell us what He says is good and right. They are goals for us to go to. The sacrifices were there for the failures, and then Jesus' ultimate sacrifice was there so that we could walk hand in hand with God and not constantly be separated from Him. Later on, God said, I want to go in there and mess with you, but if I have to keep separate, because if I go right there in the middle of you, I'll destroy you. I mean, you're so wicked and so corrupt, I would just end up destroying all of you. But even in that, his desire was, I want to be with you. And Jesus is the one who made the way. All of this effort, all of this work, all of this repetition that He's doing and setting out these standards are Him saying, I'm going to make a way that we can fix this permanently, perfectly, so that I can be right in the middle of you, and you don't have to be burdened with your sin, and I don't have to be burdened with your sin. Also, He's laying out a really clear distinction for those who want to be His followers. Being His followers means that you're in here, you're under this covering. Not being one of His followers means you're out here against Him. That's a bad place to be. And on that note, as a closing, I want to also point out that He kept warning the Egyptians. He kept telling them, this is coming. This is coming. I mean, Pharaoh was doomed. But you see where the hail came, the locust of darkness, even his officials started recognizing that there was something to this God. This is bigger. The gnats showed up and the magicians were like, this is the finger of God. That was 3 of 10, and they were already recognizing. God provided a way out even for His enemies so that they could stop being His enemies. Bible says right there that a rabble of non-Israelites also came along. And even in the laws about the Passover, if you've got people who are foreigners among you that they want to be a part of this, there's a way for them to join. I'm not exclusionary, but I'm exclusive. And that's still true today. He wants everybody to be saved. But if you're going to be saved, it's got to be something to transform. If there's not a change in who and what you are, if there's not evidence in your life that you're seeking out the one who said all these things about who He is and what's right and what's wrong, are you really one of His? Have you made that commitment? And if you haven't, today's a great day. Any questions, comments?
I was just thinking about the circumcision and where He said you want to be a part of us. And I was thinking that's like a type and shadow of where He allowed the Gentiles to become part.
Absolutely.
To be adopted.
It was a physical sign of cutting off the world and being separate. But also, like Paul talks later on about, like the circumcision they're looking for now is the circumcision of the heart, where you have cut off the world from your heart and you've separated yourself from that, so that all that's left is just the part that belongs to God. That you've shed the attachment to the world and chosen God instead. We're looking for a heart commitment that's equal to the physical commitment that was part of the original covenant.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I had something. I know I don't get in here all the time. I don't.
It's okay.
Sometimes it's my choice and sometimes not. But the picture I get for today, even this is going on now in our lives. We're sojourners passing through. And it says breathing things into remembrance by remembering these things every year and every aspect in our life, other things as well. Then we're yet going through to live with Him, to have a relationship with Him. And while passing through, say the yeast, for instance, is, that's something that's going to weigh us down and keep us from going. There may be situations that we get into our lives that we're going to have to be able to get out quick while we're passing through, so that we're not blemished by or tarnished by what we're going through.
Right.
So it's hope big old bad still going on.
Absolutely. That's a really good picture. Just talking about like us today, like yeast takes time, and if you're trying to focus on what your goals for today and this life and this world are, they can actually hold you back from being able to just step out and follow God. That's really, really good. Do you have something?
Yeah, I heard this song called Thank You, Jesus, for the blood of the body. And it made me realize that just like the Passover, Jesus' blood is just spilled blood unless someone applies it. And I think what an outrageous waste it is that some people allow that blood to just be spilled and unused. But if we want to be part of that community, I need to apply His blood and not just let it be spilled without purpose.
It's like that blood on the door. It covers, it's a protection.
Exactly.
And we can go through life and never apply that blood, and we're gonna suffer a lot more than what we do, if just not by following His word, bringing into remembrance all those things in His death. So, what is His blood?
When the Scripture says that when He told them to sacrifice the animals, sacrifice the lambs, said to drain the blood into a basin and then take hyssop branches and go. And what y'all are talking about is a picture of a door that has a bowl of blood and an empty bed. The sacrifice was made, the preparation was there, but the obedience was lacking, and because there was no salvation where it could have been just an act of obedience, an act of trust, act of faith. So let's not do that. Let's seek the Father. Let's find out what He's calling us to do. He's not going to ask us to do anything that we're not capable of doing if we'll trust Him. He wants this relationship, and He's not going to hold that out and dangle it out where we can't reach. He's calling us to come to Him. So on that note, service is about to start, and y'all be blessed, and we'll see you next week.